Good evening and welcome to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of General Election 2024. We are gearing up for the primary election, which will happen on August 13th. That's a Tuesday. The polls will be open 7 to 7, and you can also vote early. You can find all of the forums that we're covering here at Town Meeting TV at cctv.org/primary. You can also watch on Town Meeting TV's YouTube channel at youtube.com/townmeetingtv. Tonight's program, we will hear from the 4 candidates that are running for the 3 seats in the Chittenden Southeast Democratic primary. This district covers 11 communities: the south end of Burlington, South Burlington, Shelburne, Charlotte, St. George, Williston, Bolton, Richmond, Heinsberg, Jericho, and Underhill. More or less. And so you can find out if these folks are your candidates by looking into that. The candidates with us tonight are Kesha Hinsdale, Thomas Chittenden, Dr. Lewis Meyers, and Ginny Lyons. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We have a prepared list of questions for the candidates, and each of them will have 90 seconds to answer. If you mention one another or if you hear yourself mentioned, you will have 30 seconds to rebut or respond. And we will start with a 60-second opening statement. If you are tuning in live, you are also welcome to call at 862-3966, and we will prioritize your questions for the candidates. We're going to start with, I think, our senior representative.
Senator.
Thank you. Ginny Lyons. Welcome. And if you will give us a 60-second opening statement, that would be great.
Thank you, Meghan, and thanks to Channel 17. It's always great to be here, and the work that you do is outstanding. So I'm running for Senate for another term because I bring strong leadership into the Senate for a number of reasons. I was chair of my select board, on my school board, and in the Senate I chair the Health and Welfare Committee and serve on a variety of other committees. The importance and the work that I bring to public health, child care, substance use disorder, mental health, and climate change is really important at this time. One of the things that's happened in the Senate last session was we lost 5 seasoned senators, 5 new ones came in. And this term, we're going to have at least 6 new senators, 5 of whom are leaving, those 5 leaving, are chairs of committees. So it's absolutely critical that we have the stability and the continuity in the Senate at this time. It's important for a number of reasons. Obviously, you can consider that. Beyond that, I feel very comfortable representing the towns in Chittenden Southeast. Our district is a microcosm of the state with rural, farming, as well as more concentrated areas of development. And we send a significant amount of revenue into the state coffers. So in my role on appropriations, I'm very critical of how we spend those dollars and ensure that our district is covered as much as any other district in this state.
Great.
So thank you,
so
and
much.
I look forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize if I said House District. Could have been, but I don't think so. Senate. Thank you so much. Kesha Hinsdale, thank you.
Thank you, Meghan. Thank you for having me. It's always hard to follow our senior senator, Senator Lyons. I think if I mention anybody else, it'll only be nice things. We make a great team. And I've always been in my role, whether it's my 4 years in the Senate, my 8 years in the House, or believing in the work of government, because policy really shaped a lot of my life in positive ways, and I want to be able to return that favor to society. When I think about my father coming from India on one of the first student visas that was allowed to Asian students in the United States, there are definitely forces that entirely shape my life and my existence that have to do with who's sitting at the table. And similarly to Senator Lyons, there's a really big difference when you sit at the head of the table. And now chairing Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs, I don't know if the camera's picking up on it, but I'm pregnant with my second child, 32 weeks pregnant today. There has never been a woman who's chaired Senate Economic Development, let alone a woman of color or someone who's been pregnant for both of the last 2 years of their service. And I think that makes a really big difference when we talk about housing, childcare, paid family leave, you name it. An inclusive economy needs to have everybody at the table, and that's what I've tried to offer.
Great, thanks so much. And Senator Chittenden.
Thank you. So I want to start too with a thanks to Channel 17. You all do great work covering important local matters, so I really appreciate you hosting this debate. I also want to give a thanks to all the neighbors and first responders that have been working really hard this week, making sure that everybody's safe and restoring a lot of the washed out roadways as well as parks and so on. So especially in our district, so many affected communities. Thank you to all those. I am the junior senator from this district. I claim that proudly because of the great experience that Senator Hinsdale has from the House, as well as Senator Lyons' impeccable long service in the Senate. So I'm proudly the junior senator from Chittenden Southeast running for the 3rd term. I grew up in this district. I grew up in South Burlington. I grew up in the house I now live in. I often joke I haven't gone very far in life. So I know South Burlington. I know the community around South Burlington. I know the southeast of Chittenden County, having grown up here, gone to school here, and also gone to the University of Vermont. As for experience, why I feel like I want to continue to serve, as I do think I'm getting better at this, not worse. That's debatable, but it's certainly my intent, learning a lot about state government, and also with my experience on city council, as well as in Green Mountain Transit, and also in the faculty senate at the University of Vermont. I feel like I do have a track record of consensus building, so I hope to serve for another term if the voters allow me to.
Great, thank you so much. And Dr. Louis Meyers.
Yes, thank you. I'm Dr. Louis Meyers. I'm honored to be part of this forum and happy to be back here at CCTV, where I hosted a series of programs last year on healthcare. I live in Shelburne. I've been a physician for 30 years, and I'm still working as a physician in Vermont. About half that time was in primary care, and the last 15 years, nearly 15 years, has been in hospital-based medicine. And while there are many, many issues confronting Vermont, the one that really has driven me to run for the state senate is health care. We've not had a physician in the state senate, elected to the state senate, in 45 years. And I think sometimes that is a factor, especially when we talk about the complexities of health care. I don't need to tell listeners and watchers their health insurance premiums are skyrocketing. They can't get in to see a physician for a year or more. And when they do get in, it's such depersonalized care. My own colleagues in healthcare are suffering as well. The physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses are despairing because they can't give the care that they know their patients need. So I'd like to be in the state senate to bring my experience and my, hopefully, help to these issues. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to move into the questions that we have prepared. It just so happens that we also have a call that was sent in by someone else, Liz, in Burlington, and it is basically the same question on property taxes and education. So I will read the question that we have prepared here. So this year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year? And we're going to start with you, Senator.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Liz, for that question. It's top of mind for all of us. I think, I assume a lot of us got a property tax bill or are affected by a property tax bill that we just received, and all of our property tax bills have gone up. Senator Lyons mentioned she's on appropriations. You have a pretty good delegation for some of these major decisions. Senator Chittenden and I both sit on the Senate Finance Committee, and I would be the first to say I don't think we did enough this year to try and change course. It was a challenge of a perfect storm of a lot of factors, like losing federal dollars, losing grand list value, which we're going to potentially see again with the flood. But we have a lot more expenses, and we have a shrinking grand list. That's also why I work on housing, because we're trying to put a lot of the cost on a smaller number of people. There are two related issues for me that I plan to work on and have already started to work on. I think Senator Chittenden would agree. I led on a separate property transfer tax for second homes or non-primary residences. Most Vermonters would agree, even if they own a second home, that that's a luxury, not only seasonal residents. So we're not talking about deer camps, but we now have a different rate when you purchase a property in the state, a residence, and you take it out of the primary home market. To me, that is a warm-up, and I'm trying to be open about this, for pulling apart all of how we tax property in the state. Right now, it's either commercial or your primary residence. And so that's, one thing I just want to quickly say, though my time is up. It relates to what we pay for, and I think newer and fewer schools is also part of the answer.
Great.
Where we have regional world-class schools, and we turn the rest of those campuses into housing and other community uses.
Great. And we do have a second question on taxes that's following this, so this is not the end of this conversation.
Yes, this group can talk about taxes
Yeah.
quite a bit.
So, Senator Chittenden, the question to you on property taxes and education.
It is challenging to see these property tax increases. I continue to get emails from constituents saying they are not sure they can stay in their home. They're wondering if they can stay in Vermont. I will say Vermont is not alone with the affordability crisis and the housing crisis that we're struggling with. And I think we had hit a perfect storm, the fiscal cliff, as many people would describe it. And the factors into that were the disappearing pandemic dollars, healthcare costs continue to increase, that's driving it up. The legislature did add the universal meals, which also contributed to the cost that we're seeing in our property tax bills, as well as inflation was a major driver. Because our property tax, our education tax system is unique for the country, where we have centralized the funding, but we still have decentralized decision making. We have school boards deciding their spending levels, and voters are approving it. So we are somewhat limited in what we can do in the State House. We can't reach into school districts' budgets and tell them what they can or can't spend money on, because we value local control and those communities know how to spend money. But what we can do, and things that I want to spend time on, that we're going to get back some clear language, legislative language, if I'm there next January to further vet, and whoever is there will look at, will be things like we have an excess spending threshold penalty that we just reinstituted this year, and we suspended it for 5 years, but we brought it back 4 years early because it's good policy. I'd like to see that more granular. I'd like to see it targeted to specific types of spending within schools. I think that will bring some more transparency to how we're spending dollars, to get our hands around where the money's going inside of our school districts. I also want to see us reconsider the property tax credit. I'd like to expand upon that, ways to make that a little more, to scrutinize it, and we do need to look at allowable growth percentages, though there are some caveats. We need to do it right. If we do it too quickly, it'll be a mistake and it'll cause us more grief, and so that's why I'm proud of what we did put into place, and I think the next session will be really important to implement a lot of those spending controls and opportunities for efficiencies. I went long. My apologies, Dr.
Thank you so much. Dr. Myers,
I
the
can
same
learn-
question to you on
Sure.
property taxes
Sure, I
and
can learn from
education.
that. Like, I'm the only person here who's not served in the legislature, so I can speak more as a citizen who also pays property tax. It seems like it takes 2 PhDs to understand the educational funding system. It's very, very complex, and I think one thing we need to do, if we're going to get buy-in from our citizens, is to simplify it so that people know what they're paying and why they're paying. I think we're asking the schools to do a lot. I do question whether all of the mental health funding, which has increased dramatically, should be under the education budget or coming from a different department. I think we do need, as Senator Chittenden said, to look at the different, and Senator Hinsdale said, to look at the schools. Which schools can we keep open? Which should be consolidated? The best way to do that may be from an independent commission, as we did in the federal level with defense base closings. Every congressman didn't want their base to be closed, so they took it out of that realm and formed an independent commission, which I think was rather successful. So, and I think that we need to look at what we're teaching, how, and what our goals are. We have had a great school system from K through 12. I think it's struggling. And let me also mention, you mentioned the cost. I'm going to get back to health. $300 million of the budget goes to health insurance premiums for workers in the school system, which has increased over, I think, 35 to 40% in the last couple of years. So the more we can focus on health care, the more we'll get the cost down for education.
Great, thank you so much. And Senator Lyons?
well, it sounds like everything's been said, but I will probably say some of it again. And thank you for the question. Certainly, we're not immune to the effect of property tax increases. We all feel it, and it is devastating so many people. I hear from folks every day. The issue, what we did this year is to put out what I consider to be a blue ribbon commission. We've had a blue ribbon commission on taxes a few years ago, and they came back with some terrific recommendations. But what was left out were education property taxes. So now we have a commission on the future of education that's going forward to bring recommendations. And one of the recommendations that I continue to speak about, and I've started talking about it a few years ago, was how do we regionalize some of our expenses, and how do we regionalize some of the contracts that we have? How do we increase the administrative efficiencies, and considering how can schools work together for administrative costs and burdens? And then also the funding committee that is working right now is going to come back with many of the recommendations that I'm hearing from my colleagues, from Senator Hinsdale, from Senator Chittenden. And one of the things that I have been really supporting right along is how can we continue to have mental health support services for our kids without having that be a burden within the school budget. There are things that could come out. It's not simply mental health. There are other things that this committee or commission can evaluate and what makes sense within our schools and what does not. So there's a lot here. And I really look forward to the recommendations that come to us. I do not look forward to the property tax bill in the mail.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. And I recognize that these are complex issues that we're trying to answer in a short amount of time, or you're trying to answer in a short amount of time. And we have a pile of them here. So we're on to the question about progressive tax initiatives. This year, Democrats in the House proposed new taxes on the state's highest earners and largest assets, including an increased income tax on earners over $500,000, an increased property transfer tax, which you had already mentioned, on properties over $750,000, and an increased corporate income tax. Do you support raising taxes on high earners and wealthy Vermonters? And we will start with you, Senator Chittenden.
I do support having our wealthiest Vermonters pay their fair share. The issues with doing this are really in the details. A balanced state tax base draws from really three primary sources: income taxes, property taxes, and consumption, also known as sales taxes. States that only draw from one or two of these are often imbalanced tax bases that can be exploited by individuals or organizations. I would argue that Vermont's tax base is currently very progressive and balanced across these three revenue streams. Increasing the state personal income tax, as was proposed in this case right here, to be the highest in the nation, came with less anticipated revenues than originally forecasted. I recall they were originally anticipating $100 million, and then the Joint Fiscal Office came in at $70 million. And the concern I raise is, being the highest, there is a valid concern of tax flight or wealth flight. If you are making that kind of money and you have the flexibility to own a home in another state, living there for 184 days is a way to not just avoid paying the marginal increase that we were proposing, or that the House proposed, on the income tax, but we'd also lose the entire original 8% that they were paying to the state. The witness testimony I heard was that that only is anticipated to affect 17% of the people, but that was really taken before the pandemic, and the pandemic really opened up a lot of people's eyes about being able to work remotely and across state lines. So my concern is that that $70 million estimate, if it's the highest in the nation relative to our neighbors and peers, also had an anticipated diminishing returns, where we'd expect even less in the future years as that mobile wealth could also relocate. Definitely have more to say on this, and I think I'm going to concur with what Senator Hinsdale says about the $750,000 tax on properties, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, and getting into the details. Dr. Meyers, this question to you.
Thank you. I won't be able to speak to the details as thoroughly. I would support the increased wealth tax on the $750,000. I would go back to the education, though, what we talked about a moment ago, and I would also like to look at balancing the education fund by inserting some income tax as well as the property tax. And I know the arguments against it, that can be variable year by year, but I think it's tough for property owners now to see these variable property tax bills coming in. so they're suffering on a year-by-year basis. And I think that also with so many renters, we want the renters to contribute to the education. They have children who are being educated here and may be paying taxes indirectly through increased rent. But I think if we could add the income tax, perhaps we could also hold the rent steadier.
All right, thanks so much. Senator Lyons, this question to you on increasing taxes on high earners and wealthy Vermonters.
Yes, thank you. Currently, Senator Rahm Hinsdale and Senator Chittenden each serve on finance. A few years ago, I did sit on the Finance Committee, and we evaluated this and looked at the concerns about lower and middle and lower income folks paying a higher percentage of their income than those who are high earners. At that time, we were talking about $300,000. Today, the amount has gone up. Now it's either $500 or $700, whatever the amount is. We hear from people who say, I'm a high earner. I would like to pay the fair share. So it's important that we include those folks in our conversation as well as others. But it needs to be done fairly, and absolutely cannot have middle and lower income Vermonters paying the bulk of what we need. Vermont has one of the most progressive education property tax programs in the country with our income sensitivity. There may be ways to improve that, obviously, but I think with the work that we're doing now on funding for education and looking at funding for other elements of our system, whether it's recovery centers or whatever else, we really need to take the time to evaluate where we are.
Great, thanks so much. And Senator Hinsdale.
So I've served on House Ways and Means and now Senate Finance, and Vermont has a very unique provision in its constitution that essentially says we shouldn't take money out of the pockets of Vermonters unless it's better spent on the common good than left with the people themselves. And so many Vermonters are frugal, and they just want to know, if you're going to tax me more, what is it for? And this proposal on high income earners was almost entirely divorced for most of the session from what it would be spent on. So for many of us, yes, the idea of a progressive tax system and having the wealthy pay their fair share is, something we support and is generally progressive. But it's usually Vermonters have this libertarian streak, where they want to make sure the money's still being well spent, that it's not wasted, and because it can have a diminishing return and people can shield their income wealth. So I think we often are looking for surgical tools, and we come in with, a bludgeoning instrument. And what is concerning is when we talk about a wealth tax or a tax on the highest earners, when you look at taxing someone's income at $500,000, that also includes one-time taxing when they take the money they're going to live on for the rest of their lives. So that includes selling their house or rolling in their retirement. So you'd be taking a big chunk of money. I know my parents are at this exact point. You'd be taking a big chunk of their money for the rest of their lives when we know that seniors, are then living on a fixed income. Beyond that, I could not support the $750,000 property transfer tax. That would have been any property transfer in the state, including affordable housing, including multifamily housing. Really, we want properties to start transferring so that we can get the economy going with the interest rates as high as they are. So while we want to be progressive, we also want to be responsible, and those things should always go hand in hand and not be at odds.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to move on from property taxes and progressive taxes and taxes in general into housing, which is also going to need some funding. So this past session, Democrats in the House proposed spending an additional $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This bill was not taken up in the Senate. Oh, I hear that this question is erroneous, so you can help us correct it.
Somebody wrote that with a real specific slide.
Yeah. Would you support this level of public investment in housing? Is our housing crisis due more to? So we'll start with you, Senator Lyons, since we've
good.
got
I never should have said a word.
That's great. So let's get to the underlying question: is the housing crisis due more to regulatory failure or underinvestment? Which I think is a little bit of the struggle there.
But don't you think it's a balance between the two? And obviously, I think the housing bill that we may be talking about, in addition to the subsidized affordable housing that came in H.879, two different things. But yes, regulation has played a huge role, as well as subsidies and incentives for affordable housing. The bill that you mentioned, coming from the House, H.879, was taken up in my committee. We worked very hard on it, and it was passed out of committee on April 19th, where by Rule 31, the Senate has rules, and if it's got some appropriation in it, it goes to appropriations. So it was in appropriations, and it's really important to understand there is a process here. When the House was developing this bill, they were looking not just at policy, not just at emergency housing and affordable housing access, but they were also looking at how much money. The House spent a significant amount of time, and they did a great amount of good work on that bill. So we got it a little bit later. When it went, when it went to appropriations, then our committee from Health and Welfare had made some policy recommendations, and then appropriations worked out. We worked with the administration, we worked with the House, and we worked with the Senate, both on the policy as well as the funding. I think we came out with a really good solution in terms of having additional analysis and studies of whether or not we need a full-time housing program for those who are in need for permanent housing, and how that might go forward. We also are continuing our adverse weather programs, so that had been integrated into the House bill. So it was complicated.
Yeah,
but
it was.
I think we came out in a good place.
Yeah. Are those the weather has to do with emergency shelter? Is that?
Yes, that's the emergency shelter. And but now look at, we have greater need for emergency shelters. Yesterday is a prime example. Last year is a prime example. We can't let this go. Climate change is making our decisions very different, and it's really important for us to say, okay, we need to have a place for people when these tragedies take place, and we need to have services at these places when tragedy takes place, whether it's losing your home to forfeiture or whether it's climate change and a rain event. There need to be mental health supports and other services available, and there needs to be not just temporary, but a road to permanent housing. Okay. I will stop there.
That's okay. We're gonna take Senator Lyons' lead on that, and we'll give a little extra time so that you can roll up this question around housing and emergency shelter, and you'll have about 2 minutes or so to respond. And I'll repeat the question when we get to all the way around the table. But so Senator Hinsdale, regulatory failure, underinvestment. And how are we going to pay for this?
I appreciate the extra time because I think if anybody ever hears me talk, this is something I can go on about for a long time.
Yep.
And as Senator Lyons just said, as Senator Chittenden mentioned earlier, we need to be concerned not just about floods, but heat waves kill the most people of any natural disaster. Wildfires require that people be in 4 walls and with some kind of filtration system. We have a desperate need to make sure everybody has a unit of housing that has some cooling system and will keep them safe. Climate change is not coming, climate change is here. And given that, we have to look very holistically at what's going on in our housing ecosystem. It's incredibly unhealthy in Vermont, building on a national crisis. But, at last count, we had over 20,000 open jobs in the state and 600 home listings for sale. So people simply cannot find a place to live at any income level. Does that speak to the need to invest in housing? Absolutely, 100%. Do we need to get it absolutely right? Yes. And just throwing money at the problem is not going to solve it. We lose maybe 10 to 20% of what we spend on appeals, delays, regulatory issues. I can name project after project where the cost of each unit went up $10,000 to $100,000 because of an appeal or lost time due to regulations and permits.
Is this Act 250?
It's Act 250. It's municipal. it's A&R permitting. So there's many legs of the stool that we're working on. And of course, more investment is often part of the solution. But we have to also remember that some of the most affordable housing that we have for people is going to be a duplex, an ADU, some kind of mobile or manufactured unit of housing. And that's going to become more and more important to make sure we don't discriminate against any type of multifamily housing. So, do we need more money? Yes, but I do want to dispel a myth. The Senate's budget had more money for housing in FY25 than the House's. They were spending future dollars that none of us have control over because none of us have been elected to pass the FY26 budget yet. So it was also a matter of who's been here longer to see what's a responsible promise to make to Vermonters. And it was not responsible to say we would have spent all that money because I'm not sure next year that the House will be spending $100 million a year in their budget on housing. It's going to go to healthcare and paid leave and housing.
Thank you.
If we have it.
If we have it.
We're looking
If
at
you
an
have the
economic
funds.
downturn next
Right.
year.
So, Senator Chittenden, to you, this question of housing, regulatory failure, underinvestment, how are you going to pay for it?
I'll try to use a little less than 2 minutes to make up for my overages earlier. So I would say I had two concerns with the $100 million that were originally proposed from the Houses. One of them, as I recall, I don't know the specific numbers, but we had already, over the prior 3 to 4 years, greenlit hundreds of millions, I've heard as much as $500 million in public investment through the ARPA dollars that came down during the pandemic towards housing. And so we hadn't yet seen the results of that. And so it was unclear to me that the $100 million was a clear need, and I'd echo everything Senator Hinsdale said. My other concern is that Vermont just doesn't have the workforce to take on this level of state direct investment, which is tied to one concern I have, which I know Senator Hinsdale speaks a lot about, which is second homes in Vermont. Vermont, I've heard, is second in the nation to the number of second homes, and so too much of our construction dollars, I think, are going towards homes sitting vacant and idle on the hillsides and out in the luxurious parts of Vermont. I think a lot of what we've done in the most recent bills are going to start driving that investment and directing developers to want to focus more on workforce housing, which is what we need in order to build more housing as well as to weatherize our homes and upgrade our electrical infrastructure to meet our climate challenges. So our housing crisis is not unique to Vermont. It's a result of both regulatory constraints as well as underinvestment in the private and public sector. But resources in a free market gravitate towards opportunity, which can be incented through regulatory policy or relaxation of that policy and identified demand. But these shifts take years to realign. I'm proud of what we've done in the Senate the last 3 years. It's just going to take time for it to actually take effect. And I just want to just one last green light. Senator Hinsdale has been a very effective leader in accomplishing great things on the housing front. It's just going to take years for those things to really be felt. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks so much. And Dr. Louis Meyers?
Well, thank you. And again, as I guess the only outsider in the campaign here, not serving in the Senate, probably can't talk as much specifics. What I can say, looking at an outsider's perspective, is one of the things that we need to think about is where the development is going to take place. As we know, Chittenden County is where almost all the population growth in the state is taking place. It's where all the economic growth is taking place. And I think we need to spread the wealth. I think we need to focus on housing and propping up some of our communities outside of Chittenden County. I happen to work in Rutland at Rutland Regional Medical Center. Rutland was a great city at one time, and it can become a great city again. It's going to need some help from the state. But I think all of the basics are there, as they are in many other communities. I think if we continue to develop here in Chittenden County, we are going to face some of the big city problems, including traffic, that I have seen occur in other cities that were smaller and then grew. I don't need to tell you, if you sat on traffic on Williston Road or Dorset Road at practically any time of day, traffic is here and it's getting worse. So I think we need to have sort of a sense of where we're going to put the money. The floods are for real. They're going to keep coming back. These are not once in 100-year floods now anymore. They're once in every 2 or 3 years. We're going to have to think about where new housing goes. We may need to buy out some of the floodplain housing and resettle people, and that's always a very difficult thing to do. I think Senator Chittenden or Senator Hinsdale mentioned pre-manufactured housing, which I think can serve a need, particularly for young people, first home buyers. The ADUs. We need to look at the Airbnbs. Clearly, in many municipalities, those are taking up those very short-term rentals are taking up housing that could go to long-term rentals. And finally, we have some major industries like GE down in Rutland and Global Foundries here in Essex. Could they provide some housing for their workers? I don't know if we want to go back to full concept of company towns, but certainly they could be providing some housing to keep their workers here and well housed. Thank you.
Great, that's right. Thanks so much. I'm going to move on from questions of housing into the question of overdose crisis. We have number 6 here. So 231 people died from an overdose in Vermont in 2023, with 95% of overdoses involving fentanyl. What must be done to prevent overdoses and promote addiction recovery in Vermont? And I think we can all say that this is just getting kind of worse and worse as we go. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Meyers, and on this question. And
Well, this is a question that certainly I deal with in my professional life almost on a daily basis. The opioid overdoses, we've lost a number of people, too many people. One would be too many, and we've lost far more than that. The state had made some real progress, particularly with the hub and spoke. I think we were nationally known for that. The fentanyl and the combination of fentanyl and COVID sort of set us back. People weren't able to get to the hub and spokes, and then the fentanyl swamped the communities. So the overdoses have gone up. We still have a fairly robust system. One of the issues that came up this year is the safe injection sites. I know that's very controversial. Personally, I would like to see a trial in 1 or 2 limited places. It has been tried in 1 or 2 places around the country. Seems to be working, at least in preventing deaths. Whether or not it's preventing people from continuing to use opioids is another question. We need to make Narcan readily available and possibly free so that all providers and people in the home setting can have that. Finally, I want to also talk very briefly about alcohol. I think we are one of the highest per capita levels of alcoholism in the country, and I think that gets overlooked in the opioid epidemic. I can tell you in the last 5 years I've seen, this is particularly true for women, we've seen 10 women in their 30s and 40s die of alcohol liver disease. So I think when we talk about the focus on opioid, I think we have to include alcohol.
great, thanks so much. Senator Lyons.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, this is one of our top priorities, and how do we deal with the whole crisis of having opioids in our communities and other substances that people are currently addicted to. We're doing a lot of work on this, not the least of which is allowing for Burlington to have a pilot program on an overdose protection center. But that's, and it does appear that it's going to reduce public safety issues around the center, according to all the data that we looked at from Canada and from the United States and from Europe. And one of the things that I found very compelling is it does save lives, but it also provides for medical treatment, and then it will also allow for folks to get services. 42% of the people who accessed overdose protection centers actually went on to recovery programs. That's a huge number. Right now, we don't have that. The other thing that we're doing, and that I look forward to working on in the future, is systematizing our recovery centers and recovery network and the services that we offer for people. What's happening now is that folks are going into recovery, they're staying for a short period of time, they're coming out, and then they're going back in. We call that the revolving door. And we're trying to put in place some policies that will keep that from happening. So I will be happy to talk further about this. I will say we did expand the hub and spoke to include other substances and mental health treatment, so that we're looking at co-occurring disorders. We're on a trajectory that really is going to be very exemplary for other states.
Great, thanks so much. Senator around Hinsdale?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to start by commending Senator Lyons for her leadership on this, because a safe consumption or injection facility, overdose prevention facility, is not a panacea. That is the absolute ultimate last resort when you don't want people to die and lose that opportunity to rebuild their lives and have a second chance. And so us allowing this pilot in Burlington, first of all, was very thought out by Senator Lyons as something on top of a very robust system, but also that we're not going to greenlight this and then walk away. That, you know, where it's located, what services are involved, and how this unfolds matters a lot. It matters a lot that we get it right and that we stay engaged on this question. I think in general, you know, one of the most compelling statistics for me is that over 75% of people who die of an overdose tried to get help in the last week of their life. You know, so very often it's the stickiness of the interaction, it's the warmth or the length of the interaction they have with a medical professional or someone who can help them that's going to make all of the difference. And so the more systems we have that are funded and well-staffed, which is always a challenge, where someone can experience that light at the end of the tunnel that they need to see, is just going to be really critical to solving this. And Vermont has been a leader before. We can be a leader again, and it's people like Senator Lyons who are making that happen.
Great, thanks so much. And Senator Chittenden.
So the opioid crisis is a difficult one. There's lots of things that can be done at the national level that are being done, and it just takes time. Prescription practices need stricter guidelines for doctors prescribing opioids. We need to combat illegal opioids coming into the country. We need to have medical assisted treatment more available, increasing access to treatment facilities throughout Vermont. Here in Vermont, I'd like to see a stronger, expanded educational campaign combating the stigma surrounding addiction to make people feel more comfortable to seek help. I think that's done a lot with our mental health conversations to just destigmatize the conversation. I also would say that people often I feel in my lived experience that people turn to drugs when their lives aren't as happy as they could be, meaning their housing is not as available, not as convenient, when public transportation is not nearly as accessible, when they don't have community parks and have a connection to their community. So I would say a lot of this too, structurally, systemically, we need to look at our housing options so that people have more roofs in this state, so that people feel comfortable and feel connected to their communities, to allow them to change their scenery and to address their disease of addiction. And we also need to better promote the Never Use Alone hotline so that people all over the state of Vermont know that they can contact somebody confidentially and talk to them about the drugs they're using, stay on the line with them as they're using them, and be advised of meeting them where they are, the opportunities to find supports to get out of the cycle of addiction. I also think we need to rethink prisons in this country and rehabilitation shelters, but that's a whole other conversation.
Great. I recognize that we are putting you through the ringer on these big questions. So we're going to move quickly to the lightning round, and then I'm going to ask you to think about your closing statements and what you didn't really get to answer. And I'll give you a little extra time on the closing statements so you can focus on something that's important to you. So we have this quick lightning round, and we're going to start with you, Senator Lyons, and then we'll go around. Should private schools, and you can have 10 seconds to qualify, but really keep it short. Should private schools be funded with public dollars?
As long as they achieve the values and standards that we have for the state of Vermont.
Right, thanks.
I think existing arrangements should be kept in place, but we should really look at changes that are happening to us by, you know, a Supreme Court that doesn't necessarily align with our values, and we should limit public dollars to private schools.
Great, thank you, Senator Chittenden.
Generally, no, but if there's no public school in that area, we need to be reasonable in allowing students to tuition to qualified independent schools that meet our standards, as well as recognizing there are special circumstances where kids need special resources, and sometimes tuitioning makes sense.
Dr. Meyers?
There are communities around the country where this is where it is called for, the vouchers, but I think in Vermont, I would generally oppose them with the exception of the geographical challenges.
Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction? And I guess what age is that for you?
Okay, so I would just say yes, I think, to be quite straightforward. So we're talking about going from 18 to 21 for most criminalization of young people in our system. And I hope we just start to decriminalize more behavior and get people actual help.
Great. Senator Chittenden?
Yes, as part of an approach to reduce incarceration and to give kids another chance when they make a mistake during their youth. I don't want them to make one mistake at age 20 and have that live with them through a Google search for their entire life. So I'd say up to 21 is an age that I usually approach.
Dr. Meyers?
I also, before medical school, was a former probation officer, so had some experience in the court system. I have some problems with raising the age to 21. I think 19 would be appropriate.
Thank you. Senator Lyons?
Yes, I think raising the age is very good. We've been working on it for a long time in our Judiciary Committee.
Great, thanks. Senator Chittenden, should biomass play a role in emissions reduction strategies? Burning wood.
Yes, as a part of a transition, we need to be reasonable. Wood is burned in a lot of facilities, and as we look to our plans for the next 10 to 20 years, do as much as possible to make those as efficient as possible while also transitioning off of them.
Dr. Meyers?
Well, this is Vermont, and I think that's going to be a hard lift right now. I think there are other areas that we can reduce the emissions.
Senator Lyons?
Yes, as long as biomass is replaced at a rate equal or greater than the rate at which it's used.
Much more of a no on this one, because I think while we're doing the planning, we should stop burning things, essentially, in our energy transition and be as aspirational as possible.
Great. Senator Meyers, do you support overdose prevention centers?
Senator, yeah.
I mean, sorry, I did, Dr. Meyers, and I know you spoke to this already, but do you support overdose prevention centers?
I do. I mean, I think it's certainly worth the try. The worst that's going to happen is we'll get the data that shows it doesn't work, but it's worth the try. If it saves one life, it's worth it.
Great. And
Yes, I do. I think as a pilot program, it's fine in our more urban center, Burlington.
Yes.
Great. And Senator Chittenden?
Yes, in big cities. I did not vote for this for Vermont. I think we're too rural. We don't have the public transportation infrastructure. That being said, really quickly, as much as I voted against this, I'm not rooting against it. I hope it works. It was passed into law, and I hope it saves lives, and I hope it proves to be a successful model for more rural environments.
Great. We'll start with you, Senator Hinsdale. Did Governor Scott overstep his authority appointing Zoe Saunders as interim education secretary?
Yes. I mean, that is a third branch of government question right now, but it didn't do anything to help the relationship between our two branches of government, and I don't think it helps her or our education system to have this kind of issue hanging over her head.
Probably yes, but as done often in civil society, this will be resolved litigiously to set precedent for greater clarity on future similar circumstances.
Okay, Dr. Meyers?
I don't know if he overstepped his authority. It was a strange choice.
Dr.
Yes.
Senator Lyons?
Yes,
No,
I'm also a doctor, but that's okay.
Okay, great.
Yes, he did. But the courts will let us know whether or not he did.
Great. And we'll start with you. Where do you get your news?
Vermont Digger, 7 Days, the other paper, Heinsberg Citizen, Shelburne Times, Times Inc. in Richmond, the Mountain Gazette, WPTZ, WCAX. And I like to read my news more than watch it. 24-hour news networks sort of turn me off, but CNN for national news on my phone.
Great.
CCTV.
And CCTV, television TV.
We're not planting this question. It's really, we're curious
I like
about it.
VT Digger and 7 Days, and then nationally the Washington Post and the New York Times and the New Yorker.
All of the above. 7 Days, VT Digger,
Williston Observer.
Williston Observer, the other paper, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, CCTV, just right. I think one of my problems is I am very much attached to news all the time.
Yep. There you go.
I want to make sure in our laundry list we said Vermont Public. I'm not sure, but
Definitely.
all I'll add is that local news and public media is essential to the functioning of our democracy, and many of us voted to support CCTV. We're not trying to pander here, and local news and local media. As we watch more streaming activity happen, we need to figure out ways to underpin and underwrite public and local media.
Yeah. And I'm going to combine these last two questions. Do you ride the bus, and what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont? We're going to start with you, Dr. Meyers.
Actually, at this point, I don't ride the bus. There were years earlier in life when I did. My favorite ice cream is maple creamy.
Perfect.
Ooh, that's good. I used to ride the bus. I do infrequently now. Vanilla caramel fudge by Ben & Jerry's.
this is the one question I should have prepared for, because you're asking a pregnant lady about her favorite ice cream right now. Generally, it's some kind of like a cookies and cream from a local creamy stand or a Lake Champlain chocolates kind of situation. I would love to ride the bus more. I mean, right now I'm not going many places at 32 weeks pregnant. And I do want to say, if this is part of our closing statements, that public transportation needs to have its moment in the legislature, and I think it's coming right after housing. So I think Senator Chittenden will be a leader in that conversation, and we should look forward to talking about transportation.
You'll have time for a closing statement too.
That is partially my closing statement.
I ride the bus as much as possible. I definitely do it a lot whenever I'm traveling. Even if I drive to somewhere, I really like to see how other cities approach this. I used to serve on the Green Mountain Transit Board, so I'm always interested to see how things work. I work at UVM, and whenever I have a meeting in Burlington or in the area, I will do my best to hop on a bus. Sometimes it costs time, so I don't ride it as much as I want to, but I do get on as often as possible. And as for favorite ice cream, I'm a Vermont politician, maple creamies all the way. And as for the location, I have a whole list based on a variety of criteria. You can see that on my Facebook page.
Very good. So we're going to end with closing statements. We're going to start with you, Senator Lyons, and I'd like to, give us a little sense of what you didn't get to speak to here that was most important to you, because there were a number of questions and it's hard to. We'll give you about a minute and a half. So go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you again for having us this evening. I'm very much interested in moving forward on reducing toxic chemicals in consumer products. It's been a passion of mine over a long period of time, and the PFAS bill that we passed this year has a lot of work coming back about a systemic approach in government, working with businesses, working with the administration, and working with others. I think we're going to see a comprehensive program going forward. Beyond that, we're working now on healthcare and looking at hospital transformation and payment and healthcare reform. It's absolutely critical. We have several community meetings coming up, one of which will be in Burlington on, I believe it's July 29th. Folks should keep their eyes open and become engaged in this conversation with community members and what we are about to do on. I can give you the dates if you'd like. Finally, I look forward to working on the Inclusive Equal Rights Constitutional Amendment that I worked on in 2016, believe it or not, and then put into the legislature. This year, it was passed through both the House and the Senate. Next year, it will go through the Senate and the House yet again and be voted on in 2026. This is a really important constitutional amendment because it defines freedom for everyone, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, and others. So I look forward to working on that, as well as all the myriad other things that we've talked about, including criminal justice, including climate change, including housing, and other social determinants of health.
Thanks so much. Senator Rahm Hinsdale, your closing statement.
Well, I would just say I know a lot of people are worried about what's happening nationally, and it sucks up a lot of their time and attention to think about how that's going to impact them here in Vermont. State government and what we do in Montpelier has a huge impact, and often I believe in hope serves as a buffer and helps us manage our crises and our problems in a very Vermont way. We've talked a lot today about ways that it matters that we're good at government and legislating. I hope people know that there's still, that's still an element of what we aim for, is to write good bills, is to listen well to Vermonters. And there's maybe just a handful of us, I'm looking at Senator Lyons, who were here for the recession, Tropical Storm Irene, any time before the pandemic. Now we're facing all of those things, it feels like, in quick succession. And I'm just privileged. I feel privileged that Vermonters let me do this every day, and I hope to deliver really strong results and make sure they know we are doing our best. And issues are getting complicated, but we're here from them, from delivering sump pumps to Barry, after this, to writing the best policies that we can for the state.
Great, thank you so much. And Senator Chittenden.
I hope the voters see my earnest efforts to find consensus on difficult issues that are reasonable and that meet the challenges of today. If you give me another term, the things that I want to bring to the table, on top of all the important topics we've already talked about today, but things that didn't come up, so I do think we could do towing better in Vermont. There's opportunities to protect consumers relative to other states. Trash collection, I think we could achieve more of our climate goals by looking at trash and municipal trash in consolidated service throughout the state, or at least incenting it, not putting any trash collectors out of business, but trying to find ways to more efficiently do that. We need to see more transparency in our ed spending. We're collecting the data, but I don't think we're making it available enough to communities so that we can look at, since we are a statewide grand list funding our ed system, I think we have a responsibility to be able to see how that spending compares across. I also want to make our roadways a lot more intelligent. We made a great step this session by approving an automated traffic safety camera for construction zones. There are more things that we can do so that our roads can start to catch up to the intelligence of our increasingly smart cars, and that's a very an interest area of mine that I'm very passionate about. I also, this sort of came up, but I'm really excited to see one of the efforts come back this coming year on how we can disambiguate the non-homestead tax types, the types of catch-all properties that go into that non-homestead category. By having a differentiation tax rate on those things, we can do a lot more to incent through tax policy housing that we want to see throughout Vermont. So I will say also the best thing about working or serving is hearing from voters, so please reach out, thomaschittenden@gmail.com or thomaschittenden.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Meyers.
Well, thank you. Again, I'm the only non-incumbent here. I recognize that it's not easy to run against incumbents, and especially here in Vermont. People get to know them in their communities. But sometimes if we want new policies, we need to change the people making them. And we need new voices, we need new ideas. What I would bring to the state Senate is 30 years of frontline experience in medicine. And we have a healthcare system that's really struggling. And some of that is from mistakes that have been made, failed policies in this state. The One Care program is now ending. It was an expensive failure, which Governor Shumlin gifted us as he was leaving office 8 years ago. We're now on the verge of going into another experimental federal program called the AHEAD program. That will commit us to 11 years with the feds, and it's very similar to the One Care program. I know that Senator Lyons supports it. I respectfully disagree. The Green Mountain Care Board is finally putting the brakes on some of the health care increases in Vermont by keeping the rates down. I think that they need to continue. Again, Senator Lyons would like to take that power away from them and put it in the governor's office. I respectfully disagree. So we have some areas of disagreement. What I can bring to the state Senate is hard experiences learned and knowledge of how healthcare really works, to talk with legislators. It is complicated, and I think the more they can hear from someone who's been involved in healthcare, the more we can make good decisions.
Great. And since Senator Lyons, you were mentioned, if you want 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. Yeah, I would. It's very interesting to hear something that I believe in or support, and I will simply say that sometimes those things are not true, and in this case, that's the case.
Just to clarify, you're saying that you do support.
In terms of supporting the AHEAD model, what I do support is allowing for an exploration of how the state might participate and what the conditions are for that participation. I do not support something categorically, and I'll wait to see the data. On the other one, about putting the control in the governor's office, never heard that one before.
Thank
and
you.
I'm ashamed to hear it from someone who's sitting next to me.
Well, we have if you'd like to have a 30-second rebuttal in response,
I
that
would
would
just
be great.
reiterate, the Green Mountain Care Board for a long time was a cheerleader for One Care and for the hospital system, the big monopoly at the University of Vermont Health Network. We finally got the different people in the Green Mountain Care Board. Owen Foster, the chairman, is a former federal prosecutor. They have new members of the Green Mountain Care Board. They gave University of Vermont this year a 2% rate increase, I believe, rather than the 22% they asked. That's not a shot across the bow, that's a broadside, and it signals that health costs matter.
Thanks so
And
much.
I will just say that I was on the nominating committee when Owen Foster was selected to be chair of the board, and I meet with him regularly, as I do with other members of the board.
Right. So, well, we started to get into some differences, and that's great. I'm very honored to sit with a bunch of bright lights who are all willing to step up to public service, and I appreciate you all being here today. I appreciate you all for watching. Continue to tune into Town Meeting TV for more election forums as we continue towards the primary on August 13th. Polls close at 7 p.m. And what am I looking at? Oh, there's information on the screen there, and you can tune in for more election programming. Until then, thanks so much.
Thanks for
Get it
moderating.
creamy.